PIO podcast, I'd like to introduce senior consultant Leah Tedesco from Social Simulator. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to meet you, Robert.
Yeah, it's great to meet you as well. So, can you give us like an overview of what Social Simulator is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So Social Simulator, there's sort of like a couple components here. So there's Social Simulator, the company, that's our company, and then Social Simulator, the platform, obviously what our company is named after. So as a company, we sort of like to just help our clients be prepared for a range of crisis communication issues. And so that means trainings, things like plans. We really like to be involved in everything. So we're not just software, we train, we help write strategies, we create playbooks, etc. Now, from the platform perspective, obviously the platform is a huge chunk of what we do with that preparedness work. That's why our company is named after it. And the platform itself is sort of like a sandbox for any different types of communications that PIOs or other responders would use during the course of a crisis. So essentially, it's sort of like a closed network that can replicate a variety of different communication platforms from things like X or Twitter, Facebook, and we can be very flexible in terms of replicating different types of communication platforms. If, some group or a government uses sort of instant messenger or like instant notifications that go straight to phones, we can replicate that. And we also can replicate a variety of social media platforms worldwide. So we work globally, and we're prepared to meet our clients where they're at in terms of what social media platforms or other communication platforms they use. And if folks are looking for any visuals to kind of put to what I'm saying, they can check out our website, socialsimulator.com. And we have photos of the platform as well as some kind of show reels showcasing different types of media that we produce. So we also produce news videos, kind of TikTok style videos or eyewitness videos that we play into the platform as well to make it as realistic as possible.
Okay,
So
I did something like this several years ago in Cook County when I used to work for a different organization. And one of the things that they wanted me there to help evaluate how everybody did, but they had this platform, and I don't know if it was named Social Simulator at the time, but it was maybe a competitor, and I don't know remember the name, but they literally had news briefings. They had they had social media. They had the platforms asking questions to the different agencies that were allegedly registered, and so I'm assuming that's all similar, correct?
yeah, exactly. So, how it kind of works is once we have the group of participants, we'll sort of load them into the platform. Everybody will get a login. Everybody will be tweeting from whatever account they would usually be tweeting from. We'll have sort of like a website set up for them so that they can post their statements that would go on their website during a real crisis. And yeah, we also will kind of like at them on the social media components so that they're getting questions that they would get, etc. And so we can kind of scale it all the way from like a small team of maybe just like one PIO and a couple of other folks playing on the platform to huge full scale or huge functional exercises where we have multiple different agencies playing, from different fire departments. We've done a couple exercises that are for like wildfire preparedness out on the West Coast, and those have involved like, multiple different fire departments, multiple different, city governments, as well as communities or organizations like the Red Cross and things like that. And so they'll
Okay,
all
so
be.
that was going to be my next question was what types of organizations. So it's pretty much a whole gambit of any
Yes.
organization or potentially any business that might be involved in crisis communications or have a crisis communications event.
Yeah, exactly. So we work with a ton of public sector clients, so public governments, fire departments, things like that, as well as a range of private clients from large scale energy companies, as well as like airlines who maybe work in conjunction with local airports or city governments that have airports with them. So yeah, we work with a range of different organizations. Basically, anybody who's trying to prepare for a crisis, we've probably worked with them or somebody in their sector.
Okay, so how does Social Simulator how do they replicate that speed and unpredictability of social media during a crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, it's the people on the back end. So, and this is one of the things that kind of differentiates us from some of the competitors. A lot of other folks who provide a somewhat similar platform, they more provide it as like software as service, which means that you're kind of just getting, their software sort of off the shelf kind of just like a plug and play scenario. And they kind of just hand it to you. You guys exercise on your end. What we like to do is, in addition to helping craft the scenario as well, or craft some of the what we call like pseudo media and some of the visuals, we also have our folks role playing on the back end. So depending on the scale of the exercise, this can be like 1 to 5 role players on the back end who are live tweeting. So of course we pre-draft, exercise materials and things like that, but we're also able to respond live in the moment because it's actual people. So if a PIO is to post something to like the Twitter account that, maybe leaves a gap for, a question or something like that, we're able to push them on it in live time, as well as sort of adapt the scenario accordingly. If folks would have a huge question, if there would be like a huge gap in understanding based on what's being published on their end, we're able to sort of shift the content of the exercise to respond accordingly, which is the realism part of it. We're able to throw in a variety of different themes depending on how well they're doing. So if they're a really well-oiled team, you can expect that we're going to be pulling some crazy themes out to try to set them.
That because you do need that unpredictability of the public
Mhm.
and that immediacy of the response to maybe a poorly worded tweet or an error in your news release, and then of course obviously always get the trolls that like to
Exactly.
attack.
Yeah, exactly. So we have fun with that. It's fun to kind of role play as a troll for a day.
Okay, Leah, in your experience, how do PIOs, what mistakes are they commonly making, and how does social simulator help them correct those?
Yeah, so I would say there's sort of two camps of mistakes or sort of like slip ups or friction points. So the first one related to like, specifically how they're crafting messaging would typically just be in crafting messaging that's very jargony or has like a lot of usually like police officer terminology. So they will tweet things like, calling something a code blue. I don't have a background in police work, so I don't know what those codes mean. And, the public wouldn't either. So that kind of thing, or maybe posting something in just a very matter of fact tone and not showcasing the sympathy that we know is happening in the room. So that's kind of one camp. And then the other camp is less with the PIOs specifically and more at those friction points of like internal communication. So given that we run a lot of these trainings, it's very obvious from our viewpoint looking at the types of messaging that they're posting. It's obvious when there's a gap in communication between the PIOs themselves and, kind of the boots on the ground responders, because we know the scenario, we know what information they should have. And so it's obvious when they don't have that. And that's a little bit trickier to correct. So, with the first mistake, that's where that live response really helps correct. We're very easily, or very, very quickly, we can kind of tweet pointing out the fact that they've used a lot of jargon that, I, as a public, a member of the public, wouldn't know what that means. And they catch on to that pretty quickly and usually shift course very quickly after tweeting like one tweet like that. For the other type of communication issue, usually that kind of comes out more in sort of the after action reports or the debriefing. Over the course of longer exercises or more like functional exercises, we have seen PIOs then say, okay, we need another like liaison officer. You need to go down to, the room where those folks are actually role playing the response and things like that. Or then after the fact, we usually take a look at their crisis management plan or anything like that. See, is there another role that needs to be staffed, like a liaison officer, or is there some structural change we can make to the plan that would kind of help correct that? So that's
And I
what.
think that's really valuable because when you show those choke points that they run into, obviously that's what's going to happen during a real crisis. So if they don't correct that, it's only going to bog the agency down even more.
Exactly. Exactly.
Have you seen some of the trends like with the way misinformation spreads online, and how do you guys do that in order to help them correct their behaviors?
Yeah, definitely. So misinformation, I would say probably 98% of the scenarios we create have some aspect of misinformation because it is just so rampant. And I think there's like two different camps of it. So there's sort of the more traditional camp where we think bots or like sock puppet accounts usually run from like, maybe some outside political campaign. Usually it's a very targeted, very motivated campaign. Oftentimes, folks think about the 2016 like Russia election interference. And I think even like late last year, there were a couple of political influencers, I guess I'll call them, it was sort of revealed that they had been accepting money from like Russian or foreign think tanks. So that there's that kind of misinformation where somebody's, paid to post some sort of angle or something. And then there's sort of the new wave of misinformation that really just comes from how folks communicate online. So obviously as PIOs and as, public officers, responding to a crisis online, we're looking at Twitter or social media as a tool to help us communicate. But there's, for a lot of people online, social media is just sort of a place to have fun. So a type of misinformation that can happen oftentimes is just through like memes where somebody will think something's funny. It would be funny if this happened. It would be funny if this were part of the ongoing crisis. They share it just thinking they're funny, but it actually picks up steam. And then now you have something ridiculous that people are believing. So, in terms of how PIOs can combat the misinformation, there's sort of our traditional like best practices that I think always apply, which is, first and foremost, fill that information void. It's so important to post a holding statement early, even when you don't have information yourself. It's super important because when folks are, running to Twitter, running to Facebook to look up what's happening, you want your account to pop up as a source of information so that they will follow you right then and there and see when you are posting, more concrete information once you have it. And then there's sort of the other kind of more creative facets, such as knowing your trusted third parties and your local groups, because this is where you can kind of communicate directly with people to help combat sort of that kind of second type or harder to catch misinformation. So are there like Facebook neighborhood watch groups that talk about these things that you can kind of have connections with? Are there any local spokespeople you can ask to share out information? And again, these are relationships we want our clients to be forming on non-crisis days. And I think the main lesson here is even when, there's kind of memeable misinformation, that's sort of separate from our responsibilities as communicators during a crisis. You should never try to get in on the joke. It's almost never the right move, I'd say.
No. Leah, so I'm assuming that these simulations they can be tailored, but are there ones that are out of the box that you have pre-formatted already, and that it just, hey, this is the kind of crisis we're going to throw at you, or do you?
Yeah. So I would say everything is tailored. That being said, we have like camps of crises that we've done so many times, like things like wildfires or hurricanes, more and more things like deepfakes and AI, which I'm sure we'll get into. And so we have sort of camps of, or kind of buckets, I guess, of common crises, specifically, by sector or by like region of the U.S. for public sector clients. But everything is tailored, and we kind of do that on a sliding scale. So that can be the, organization or government coming to us with pretty much a fully developed scenario, and they say, hey, we just want to play in some of this on the platform to kind of give our communicators a bit more to test with. Or we'll have clients come to us say, okay, we want a scenario that tests these roles and these functions. We're thinking maybe a wildfire, maybe a flood. Can you help us create that? And so yeah, everything is like very, very tailored and very flexible.
And I know you said this before, but I just want to like reiterate it. Social Simulators integrated it as a platform. It's closed system, so you have, like, I'm assuming social media platforms created that fit that
Mhm.
area, correct, or the
Yeah,
region that you're working, and you might have a
exactly.
different name for them.
Yeah, exactly. So everything is closed, and that's more for security purposes so that, nothing escapes the platform and doesn't give anybody a good scare. And also it's really helpful then for after action reports because we're able to just sort of like press a button and export everything into a folder so that folks can kind of review it as they're doing sort of their after actions. That being said, we are able to sort of integrate some real world sites. So sometimes this will be like aviation maps for like flight maps that are real world or other GIS systems, things like train statuses or other live websites. We can sort of integrate them into the platform live, but nothing goes out of the platform live, if that makes sense.
That's good to have, because the last thing you want to do is be like Hawaii when they were testing their system alert and they put out a missile warning.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's also why we have like email. A lot of folks are like, "Oh, well, we have email." It's like, yeah, absolutely. Email's not that hard to kind of utilize, but it's nice to keep everything in the system and really nice to then export it and see, how long did it take them to respond to this request, et cetera. Everything's sort of
So you go all the way down to the email level.
yes, we do. We do.
That's an interesting thing, because obviously the amount of emails that come into a PIO's email box in a crisis, and a lot of times they forget.
Yep, that happens very frequently. And the other thing too is we're able to again kind of test those internal communications. So sometimes during the planning phase, we'll purposely plan to send an email to the wrong person to see if like they will then forward it over to the right role, etc. So we like to get very granular to try to test kind of every aspect of communications because we know again a lot of times it can be those internal communications that will really trip up the crisis, and those are the aspects that aren't tested that well when you're talking about just like a PowerPoint deck, or sort of like a more heavily discussion based tabletop. You don't really find those types of friction points in an exercise like that.
Right. I like that. That's that's a nice little feature to put in there because it definitely you see if somebody's paying attention. Yeah, I like that. How do you guys handle the changes in social media algorithms to the platform so it switches over to the simulation?
Yeah, definitely. So, first, we have our great team who creates the platform and who kind of updates it. So, they're always looking to kind of keep the platform most up to date. You know, with all the changes that happened on Twitter or X, those were like tons of conversations we had internally. Ours is called Twupdates. So, we didn't have any name changes, but, you know, we went back and forth. I think they had changed the character limit if you pay for X.
Hmm.
So, you know, we had discussions about how that was going to affect our platform. And then in terms of the algorithm, because it's all live and everything's like planned out, our platform doesn't utilize an algorithm like that.
Okay,
Everybody who's role playing is like very heavily involved in social media. That's like kind of my background is mostly in like social media and online communities. That's sort of the area I'm coming to this work with. So we keep ourselves very like appraised of that of those sort of changes. And we also kind of discuss with the client in terms of like what they're trying to test. So while we're always going for realism, sometimes we don't want to match one to one the volume because we don't want the team to be so overwhelmed that they're immediately like put off and, you know, kind of hands up in the air like this is impossible. We sort of try to meet them where they're at so that they're pushed enough to get something valuable and to find those friction points, but not pushed so hard that, you know, they're kind of out of it before it even starts kind of thing.
got it. Yep, I like that. All right, so let's talk. You brought it up, deepfakes and AI. The technology has evolved so rapidly and so quickly, and if you pay for some of the good platforms that do image generation,
Mhm.
so how is social simulator adapting that into the challenges for crisis management?
Yeah, this is sort of a ever-present conversation as I think it is with pretty much everybody in this field. So, first and foremost, we're doing our best to just kind of keep our ear to the ground and to start talking with people who are experts in that field because it has moved so quickly unless if you're actually like working with AI, you're an expert on that. I think everybody's still kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So we have a network of different experts as well that we will bring in, sort of topical experts. We do the same thing with cybersecurity exercises, just because they can be so niche depending on the scenario that we want to make sure we're creating a realistic scenario and you know hitting all the points we need to be hitting there. So we're doing the same with AI and deepfake technology, sort of reaching out to other experts in their field and making sure that we have connections there to bolster our own understanding. And we're definitely changing the sort of topics of crises as well. So we've had, I think, like 3 or 4 this year that are AI, or I guess in the last year, AI deepfake technology like based. So there was like a really big real life incident in Asia where employee, you know, gave I think like $15 million from the company because somebody had created a deepfake replica of their financial officer along with deepfake replicas of multiple employees. So it was like a whole deepfake Zoom call. So that we've definitely seen clients say, okay, we want to run a scenario sort of like that. And yeah, so we're trying to adapt our platform as well by adding in deepfake videos. So as I mentioned, we do news videos. We're working to kind of refine the process of creating deepfake videos as well so that folks can test them. And it's sort of a tricky thing that we find here is it's interesting because sometimes folks will use AI photos for exercises anyways. So then
Mhm.
when you want an AI photo to actually be simulating an AI photo, it can cause some confusion as well of like, okay, are we supposed to be interpreting this as fake or as, you know, fake within the bounds of the exercise?
And that's the challenge that you have right now with the way the technology is. Yeah, I could definitely see that. But I'm
Yeah.
glad to see that you're at least thinking that way because obviously that, especially on, I think maybe on the corporate side more than anything.
Yeah. We also run training. So this is kind of, some of the work we do outside of the platform. We'll run other types of trainings or use our other platform that's called the Crisis 90 platform. It's not as realistic because it's meant to be more of like a tabletop discussion based, but we add in similar types of realistic media like those news videos, news articles, things like that. But we'll run trainings with that platform where it will be like, maybe like 30 minutes of discussion. Then we go into like phase one of the exercise. Then we debrief, have another 30-minute discussion. And so we'll run exercises that way, specifically talking about AI and misinformation. So we try to do more targeted trainings right now while sort of everybody in the sector is trying to get up to date.
Right, right. Cool. So where do you see the future of crisis communication training heading as we
Yeah.
move forward?
My where I think it's heading and where I definitely hope it's heading is more involvement between PIOs and other kind of factions of the response. So sometimes what we see where we'll see PIOs kind of thought of as like add-ons to an exercise and they're not centered. And this can be so tricky for multiple reasons, but we really feel strongly that there's huge benefits to involving everybody. And oftentimes we have these discussions with clients because they're also wondering, okay, well, should PIOs be the only ones using the platforms or is it helpful for everybody? And our viewpoint is, everybody can kind of take from what the PIOs are doing in a couple different reasons. So when we think about like what crisis communications used to look like 20 years ago, it used to be very different in the sense that most PIOs were responding with traditional media. So, your press releases, talking to journalists, things like that. And it was more about kind of like that broadcast media after the fact, or you had a bit more of a delay. Obviously, with social media, everything is sped up and it's not just broadcast communication, it's two-way. And so the challenge here is that, I live in New York City. If there were to be an active shooting or something in Times Square, I would know that immediately. And probably 5, 10 minutes after the incident, there would already be theories on social media about who it was, why, all that juicy stuff. So for PIOs, the challenge is, responding more quickly, but this also gives us sort of an edge because we're also able to use social media as like a data intelligence gathering tool. And
Mhm.
that's another reason why we think the integration between all the roles is really important in the training phase. So we ran a training that was an active shooter drill at like a major metropolitan like subway station. And what we actually did for that one is we had everybody sort of have access to the platforms and PIOs were on there also monitoring, seeing what people were posting. So we had some intelligence gathering going on as well, where folks would be posting, I just saw the shooter in this part, or like I'm in this part of the station and I'm hearing shots right near me. And they're able to then, communicate that up the chain. The officers, playing during the functional exercise actually went to that part of the station then and we're checking bathrooms and we're checking sort of like the actors role playing in that part of the station. So we think it's really important to have realism, not just so that it's, more engaging or more entertaining for the folks taking part in the training, but because there's a lot of benefits as well to, the changes in the
Yep.
landscape.
Oh
And
yeah.
when we sort of working together, we can communicate all the information we have on hand.
And I've always been a big proponent of this, even before we had a platform like this available to us at my previous agency. We would run active shooter drills and simulations for disasters. And I would always say, why have we not integrated our PIO into the
Mhm.
exercise? I'm like, well, we're just doing the active shooter thing. I go, when the shooting happens, who else is going to be talking to the? They
Exactly.
need to be in that whole scenario, and it was always a battle to try and get that PIO into it.
Exactly. And like, I totally understand from the logistics standpoint, exercises like that are expensive. They're hard to
Uh-huh.
plan. You need everybody to take a day out of their calendar. But that's sort of why it's nice to also have tools like the platform because we can integrate those operational responses to make it just like a full scale sort of like, tabletop. Nobody's actually responding. You don't have, kind of boots on the ground testing that aspect, but we have everybody in the room simulating the response and simulating the communications between different departments. And like I said, that is such a common friction point. I think like probably 70% of the exercises we see that are run with those kind of two branches of the response, there's some sort of discovery of, okay, we actually need more people, in this room communicating back what's being said, or, more information sharing. It's such a common friction point for folks.
Right, right. Leah, what's next for social simulators? Or anything new features coming up or something in development in the pipeline?
Yeah, so we just released like a new version of the platform. So we just had a complete aesthetic overhaul, and it came with some new features. Like I mentioned, the kind of live integration of GIS systems or other websites like that. And we're always updating the platform, always, always. So there's always new features or new things that we learn depending on, like, if we have a new client saying, oh, we use this communication system, and it's something we've never done before, we'll kind of get it set up for that client, and then that's sort of a new tool. So we're always changing it, we're always updating it. And also, if there's something that, your department uses that you don't like see on the platform or see on our website, it's worth asking, because 9 times out of 10 we can create something comparable.
I like that. I like the fact that you're able to tailor make it. I think that's incredibly important for organizations to try and make it as realistic as possible and bring it as close to home as they can. So I like that. Leah, is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
Yeah, I guess I don't know the specific wording of the question, but just generally about the work we do outside of the platform. So as I mentioned, the platform is a huge chunk of the work we do with clients, but we're sort of involved on what we call like the preparedness pathway. So that can be, starting off like creating a crisis comms plan or reviewing an existing plan, updating an existing plan. Then we like to run trainings to sort of socialize those plans. So we use our other platform, the Crisis 90 platform, to run sort of a more involved tabletop exercise. And then we kind of move to, the juicy bit, the platform itself, where we're really testing, really ramping up the speed, really trying to find those friction points. And then we also do kind of like one-on-one work or other work related to social media. So oftentimes folks will discover during a platform like, okay, well, we're okay with the response time, but actually our Twitter hasn't been updated in forever, or we don't know how to post outside of times. We don't know, we just need general training about social media, sort of that kind of blue sky day peacetime training. So we'll kind of help run those well as well. And also just sort of topical updates. So we've had a bunch of previous clients reach out asking if we can help run a training on AI or on misinformation, specifically with an AI angle. And we help run those as well. So we do a lot of work outside of the platform, but the platform is definitely like at the heart of all of the work, and sort of everything is kind of connected into that.
I like that you guys have that kind of like holistic version, that 360 version all the way around everything that involves crisis communications, from the social end of it to the planning and the execution phase. So I like that. Very, very cool. All right, Leah, let's lighten this up. Go to some like rapid fire questions.
Okay, let's do it.
Texting or talking?
Talking.
Movies or books?
Movies.
Coffee, tea, or energy drink?
Actually, just hot chocolate. I'm not a caffeine person.
Adult drink of choice?
Lychee martini.
Oh, cats or dogs?
Cats.
What's your favorite go-to karaoke song?
Anything from Phantom of the Opera.
I like that. What would be your superpower if you could have one?
I think teleportation.
Everybody likes that. Yeah, I think yeah, yeah, I like it. If you could instantly become an expert in one thing, what would it be?
I would want, I don't know if this is kind of cheating, but I would want to be fluent in every language. So that might be multiple things, but I think just that. Yeah.
No, I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. Ask permission or beg for forgiveness.
I'm definitely a beg for forgiveness kind of person, I think.
It's most communications people. What place you most want to travel to?
Italy.
What's your favorite way to relax after a long day?
Sewing.
Who would you choose if you could have coffee with any historical figure, living or dead?
I think like Nelson Mandela or somebody else who was controversial in their time, but is definitely widely respected now.
Nice. What advice would you give to PIOs looking to strengthen their crisis communication skills?
think lay that groundwork now. So if, you need to get more involved in social media, make accounts, start scrolling, getting used to that sphere, and have conversations too with your department or your colleagues about how you can kind of help build out other exercises that are already going on. So if there's an exercise happening, ask if you can at least observe, play a small part in it, try to build all those relationships now.
As we wrap this up, do you have a piece of wisdom or a motto that you live by?
Think there's nothing you can't do if you don't just like break it down kind of step by step. Nothing's too daunting.
Okay. And this is kind of a combo question. How can agencies get started with Social Simulator if they're interested, or reach out and follow up with you to learn more?
Yeah, so they can check out our website, socialsimulator.com, or they can reach out to me, Leah, that's Leah, at helpfuldigital.com. And then also you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Leah Tedesco.
And I will add all that in the show notes. Leah, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Robert.
I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.